We are back with the penultimate scouting overview for UNC scouting reports that Jason Staples of Inside Carolina of Expert Football Analysis fame has done. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com.
Woo!
In case you're watching these in order, we didn't record this after the tight end one. We did not. This is like 3 days later. Trust me. It says something about my ability to wash clothes and to shower.
Yeah, it's not like we batch these at all.
We don't do them all at once, I promise. That is Jason Staples, like I mentioned. We are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, like I always mention, and Congruity. Jason, wide receiver room. This is a room that we're going to talk about some guys, and then we're going to talk about some other guys, and I'm not so sure that other guys might be put on a show better than the guys we talk about initially. But let's start first. Gavin Blackwell. Gavin's a guy that had a couple drop issues in a game or two, had some exciting plays, made some plays, had some inconsistency, we'll call it that. But I think he's got a lot of talent. What did you see from Gavin doing this work?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that he's not had the ability to stay quite as healthy as what you'd like to see. We've talked about that over the years, that, the best ability is availability. And last year he wound up getting banged up, and, it was really his first opportunity since 2022 to have the kind of impact that he wanted. And, he got banged up early on. So you think about what he's done. He started the first 4 games in 2022 after Antoine Green got hurt. And he was sort of the speed guy at that point. And, they were actually pretty efficient in 2022 when he was on the field, even though there was a pretty big uptick when Green, who was an NFL wide receiver, came back. Then in 2023, he was slated to basically be one of the top 4 guys, and then got banged up in week 3 and missed the next month. And he never really got back into the rotation the remainder of the regular season. So really his grade for me is sort of a giant incomplete, because he played some as a redshirt freshman and handled himself pretty well, but was clearly not quite ready to, fill the shoes of a true NFL guy. And then last year he was, in position to be one of the main guys, and then just found himself sort of on the outs in the rotation once he got banged up and Tez Walker came into the lineup. So he's kind of an incomplete for me. And, at the same point, I thought he played pretty well in the postseason exhibition game against West Virginia. So, he showed the one long catch he had down the sideline against their, all conference corner. He ran right by him. And that's really what you're expecting from him. I mean, Blackwell, you're looking at a 6.47 high school 55 meter. That's fast. That's real fast.
He can scoot.
And so, what's that?
He can scoot.
Yeah. So, and when you watch him out there, that translates. I mean, he has that kind of effortless accelerator where, when he has that opening, when he gets off the line of scrimmage, if you don't get your hands on him, if he's given a position to run by a guy, he can run right by you. And, that can go a long way. That can erase a whole lot of other flaws. And, frankly, he has had some other flaws. I mean, last year, one of the reasons he didn't get back into the rotation once he got healthy is the 2 drops that he had in the opener, and the couple opportunities he had in that opener before he got banged up, were ugly. They were ugly drops, and you can't have those kind of drops and expect to keep playing. So he needs to continue to be more consistent catching the football. He's got to continue improving his ability to get off of more physical coverage, but he brings all the speed that you want on the outside into play, and he's enough to be tantalizing there, a guy that could step forward and become a game breaker type player for you. He just hasn't proven it yet, and that's kind of where he's at. You almost have to treat him like a young player, but in terms of expectation, but he's kind of in that now or never situation in terms of his career.
Yeah, got to stay healthy, and we'll talk about some guys that these older guys have got to stay healthy and got to produce because there's guys at their heels getting ready. One guy that's an older guy that's sort of really become the leader of this team. If you've read Inside Carolina and you've paid attention, J.J. Jones is a guy who's probably a star in the making in the media realm. If football doesn't pay the bills for a long time, then he will certainly get the bills paid on this side of the camera doing this kind of stuff. But Jason, he's another guy. He's been really good at times. He's made some fantastic catches. What'd you see from him scouting him over the last couple of years, specifically going into this one?
I thought he took a nice step forward last year. The prior years, he was a big-bodied wide receiver. He still is. I mean, he body size hasn't really changed. But he's a big-bodied wide receiver, kind of a guy that doesn't have. He's not the burstiest guy in the world. In some ways, he's got all the other traits that Blackwell doesn't, and some of the traits that Blackwell has, he doesn't. So he doesn't have the sports car kind of acceleration that Blackwell does, and he's more of a good pickup truck that you put out there, and big frame, strong, not the most laterally quick, doesn't have the effortless acceleration and burst and explosiveness that you have. It's not going to be he doesn't tend to create a ton of separation, but he does have a big catch radius, and he does, as of last year, make a bunch of contested catches. Prior years, he'd put himself in position for those contested catches, and he made a few of them, but he just didn't make enough of them, and he had some really painful drops in the process. You go back to 21 and 22, and he had some drops that were memorable. He had 5 drops in 2022 on 51 targets. Last year, he had 64 targets and 2 drops. And that was, I thought, a significant improvement. It was a noticeable improvement. And it wasn't fluky. It was a situation where he did a better job of setting himself up in terms of controlling his body, in terms of putting himself in the right positions to make sure that when the ball came in, he was in a better position to receive it. He improved as a pass catcher. And so now, you look at last year, he became a better contested catch player. He became another guy, along with a guy like Bryson Nesbitt, who can be a real weapon in red zone type situations, in back shoulder situations, on third down. A lot of different things you can do with him, and he also became a really good player on some of the deep post stuff. He's not the burstiest, most sudden player in the world, but I think he's got pretty good long speed. He's more of a strider. And there were times last year with teams worried about Tez Walker over here, and even some of the games before Walker got on the field, where if the safety help wasn't there, he ran right by guys, and May was able to put the ball over the middle on some of those post routes and deep over routes, and he was able to make teams pay with that. So to me, he comes into the season as the most seasoned. He's got the most reps under his belt of the wide receivers. And in a lot of ways, the most complete wide receiver on the team at this point. He also, I thought, was a pretty reliable blocker. Still has room to get better there, but again, a big bodied type player that harder for some of the smaller corners and so on to get off his blocks once he gets his hands on him. So he's a guy, I think you can win with him, and a lot of teams in the ACC would trade their, say, X wide receiver for him.
Yeah, I think he's a good player. Like I said, he made some catches, he made some splash plays, but he's a consistent guy, and he's sort of the de facto leader of that room, and that matters for Lonnie Galloway. A guy that we mentioned, Gavin Blackwell's injuries. Kobe Paysour had some injuries, needs to get fully healthy, get back on the field. but when he's on the field, he's a difference maker. I thought his injury last year was as significant to the offensive production as anything else people talked about. I don't know if you agree there, but felt like when he went down, it became an issue for Drake May not having him out there. What'd you see from Kobe?
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought last year they were planning, and they were not all that coy about this behind the scenes. They were going to run a lot of the offense through the slot receiver position. They knew they had Nate McCollum. They knew they had Kobe Paysour. They knew they had guys there that had the ability to create space, to get open, and potentially make big plays. And what they were going to do offensively, they were going to try to take advantage of that with a guy like Drake May who can put that ball on those guys quickly and get it to them in space with a lot of opportunity to run. And then McCollum got banged up in camp and he was a shell of himself all year up until the postseason exhibition game against West Virginia. And then Paysour missed most of the year. And so, you talk about having a real impact on the plans for the year. That I agree. That had a pretty significant impact on what they were planning and what they were able to do. They ended up being a little bit more of a vertical long ball dependent offense as in the passing game than they wanted to be. Because, with Tez Walker, he's much more of a vertical wide receiver, run by you, go routes, dig routes, and post routes. Then you get J.J. Jones, go routes, back shoulder fade, dig route, post route. That's really what he excels at. They didn't really have from the receiving core last year the guy that they needed to complement that as much as they wanted from that slot position or from a Z position that would have been a different kind of player. And a lot of times that's something this is one of the things that I think is underrated in terms of roster construction, that a lot of people don't, even a lot of college teams when they're recruiting, don't consider enough. And that's that you don't just need to have really good wide receivers. You need to have a good mix of skills with your wide receivers. So a good example of this a few years ago, actually the last couple of years even, are maybe a little bit less of an example because the talent level also fell off. But if you look at Clemson at one point had collected so many 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", stretch the field wide receivers that they just had a wealth of riches with those guys. But when they didn't have they've had several slots, but who's the guy that's now with the Raiders that they had?
You're killing me.
Doesn't matter. When they had an
NFL player in the slot, they were different.
Right. When they had an NFL player in the slot, and they had like 3 or 4 in a row, right?
Yep.
That you put a guy like a T. Higgins out there on the outside, and then you put one of those guys that looks like a used car salesman or an insurance salesman on the inside, and you're like, oh, well, that guy's not going to be all that good. And then that guy leads the team in catches and in yardage.
Hunter Renfrow.
Hunter Renfrow's who I'm thinking of, right? And he looks like a guy who's selling you insurance, a few doors down from you, right?
Frat guy that's just killing you.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Hunter Renfrow without a shirt on?
It's just.
He looks like. Yeah. I mean, he looks like a normal dude in a lot of ways. He does not
a high level college football player.
You don't look at him and go, okay, that dude, that is an NFL wide receiver. And guess what? He is an NFL wide receiver. And when Clemson didn't have one of those guys, that was a real problem for them. Right? You think about North Carolina when they had Antoine Green and Josh Downs on the same field. The two skill sets meshed so well that was really difficult for defenses to handle. When Antoine Green got hurt and all they had was Josh Downs, that was a real negative. When Downs was not out there and Green was all that was out there, that was also, the synergy was not there. Last year, without Paysour, without McCollum, that really impacted them. So getting to McCollum, or getting to Paysour in terms of the scouting report, he to me is, you sort of have to think of him as a smooth player. He's not an elite speed guy. He's not he's not a sports car acceleration. He's not, pickup truck big. What you got with him is a guy who he's going to give you a nice, smooth ride where you're always going to have space. Right? He's not quite a luxury car, but he might be he's right on the edge of that. He always finds space. He's got a knack for route running. He's quick, sort of in a phone booth. He's not jittery, jitterbug type like a Josh Downs, but he changes speeds really naturally. He understands how to set up his routes. And when you watch him, he just always finds ways to get open and to create space. Those guys are really valuable, right? You'll take a bunch of those guys who run mid 4.5 over a bunch of guys who run, 4.37 who don't have a knack for changing speeds and can't find ways to get space. What Paysour does is he does that and then he catches the football. Now, he had 3 drops before, getting hurt last year, which was uncharacteristic. There are a couple of them in that first game, which was surprising. But he's consistently made contested catches. He's one of those guys that just finds ways to create space and get open. I can't say that too much. I think he's going to be one of the most important players, especially early in the year, for whoever is playing quarterback at Carolina next year. And one of his values is that you can line him up outside, you can line him up in the slot, you can do a lot of things moving him around, and he's always just going to find ways to make it easier for your quarterback. And, some of that's just being a really smart player. So the downside, he's now had 2 non-contact foot injuries. Is he going to be able to stay available? Right? If he can stay available, I think he's one of the leading receivers on this team next year.
Yep, and he can make the circus catch like he did against, I believe, Syracuse, reach back, tip it to yourself, and outrun everybody. I like him. I think he's a good player. I think your point there about every quarterback needs a security blanket that they know is going to be open, that when all goes to hell, I've got this guy open. Kobe Paysour can be that guy for whoever the quarterback is. The next guy we're talking with Jason Staples here on the wide receiver scouting report, is Nate McCollum. Thought he was going to be the guy. Before you get started, one of the best things I heard from any player all season is Nate struggled mightily. I believe against Virginia, he couldn't catch a thing. Dropped, it was ugly, and he admitted it was ugly.
He had 4 or 5 drops against Virginia. It was bad.
Brutal. It was like the yips in football. But what he was asked when we had him back in January, whenever we talked to him, somebody asked him, I think it may have been Adam Smith here with Inside Carolina, said, you were dealing with injuries all year, and you were never completely healthy. Was that the reason maybe you had the drop issues? And he straight up said, nope. Just didn't catch the ball. Wasn't focused. So he owned it, didn't blame it on anything. I expect him to come back and have a big year. Jason, this is a guy you were really high on. Coming into the year last year, where are you now with Nate McCollum?
My view hasn't changed. And by the way, I think he's wrong about that. I think the injuries did have impact, partly because and he had some hamstring stuff, among other things. When you get banged up, it impacts how well you can focus. So as a wide receiver, people talk about about hitting a major league fastball or a major league slider. I think a major league slider is harder than a major league fastball for what it's worth. But this is the hardest thing to do in sports, and it's up there. But catching a football at the major college or pro level with the defensive back draped all over you, put into a small window, and having to do that while knowing contact is coming and all that, that's up there as well. That's way up there in terms of athletic and difficult things to do. And a lot of people don't really understand that because it's like, man, I could catch that pass. Well, yeah, you could catch that pass in your backyard. Sure. When you're facing the person that threw it the whole time and, same distance, same velocity of throw, you probably could catch that. But now let's have you run that route and let's have the ball released before you ever turn your head. And now you've got to turn and pick up where, find the ball in flight as you're turning, get your hands ready. Oh, and by the way, I'm also going to have somebody pulling at you. Okay, now that's hard. Now I'm going to introduce, you got to be a little bit extra careful about your cut because you've got a little tweak in your hamstring that's going to impact that. What percentage is that going to knock off your potential ability to focus wholeheartedly, 100% on focusing where that football is and getting your hands to it? It's going to have impact. It's going to have impact. I respect him for saying, no, I just didn't catch it. I don't believe it. I respect him for doing it. It's what you're supposed to say. It's what, I would hope I would say in that situation, but it's not true. You know how I know it's not true? Prior to coming to North Carolina, you know how many drops he had?
If I remember our scout last year, like 2.
In his entire career before Carolina, 2 drops. 2 drops. And I'm looking, let's see, let's add this up. 79 plus 23 plus 5. So that's what, that's 90, 92, 97 targets, 2 drops in his career prior to coming to Carolina. He's not a guy that has dropped the football a bunch. And he was a reliable catcher of punts, too, which tells you that ain't fluky. So, yeah, I think it had impact. And before he got banged up as much, he sort of got banged up in camp, came back, did well, got banged up again. He had a couple good games in there. Look at what he did against Minnesota once he started to get healthy again before he got banged up again. So I don't believe it. I like this guy a lot. I think he's a guy that they can game plan for. He's sort of built like a tailback. Super bursty athlete, isn't afraid of contact, and you get him in a one-on-one situation in the slot, and he's a threat to go the distance all the time. And as a reliable catcher of the football, that's a good combo. Now, he's short, he's stubby, he's not exactly going to have a bunch of, he's not a guy you want to put the ball up to on a fade on the goal line, that kind of situation. But in all sorts of other stuff, he's a threat. He's a guy you can do end arounds with, you can do jet motion, jet sweeps with, you can do a lot of different things. A real weapon on screens. The injury thing last year, I think, dramatically changed what he was. If he comes close to what he was at Georgia Tech this year, then he's probably the leading receiver on this team at the end of the year. At least a guy that becomes probably the most consistent big play threat on this team. And a guy that they're going to have out there a bunch.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think he's a good player. I'm mad respect to him for just owning it. To your point, I 100% agree with what you talked about with the focus and the injury and all that. But for him just to man up, own it, you got to love that from a player. Nate McCollum, the final wide receiver that Jason scouted here. Now, this is segment probably a little bigger than we normally do for any position, but wide receivers, other contributors. I got my money on Jordan Shipp being a guy that plays a ton. I've said it 100 times. When you have a quarterback whose pro day is that important to him, and you ask a guy that's never caught a college pass to come catch passes for you at your pro day, I just think that's a huge deal. Maybe it's not, but it tells me that Jordan Shipp's a guy who can play. You got Alex Taylor, you got Culliver, you got Hamilton, you got Paul Billups. North Carolina, Lonnie Galloway's wide receiver room, Jason, it's stacked. A lot to choose from.
Yeah.
I said it during the spring, and you were there. I was like, these old guys got to get healthy and get out here on the field because these young guys are coming for their jobs. Other contributors, your thoughts?
Well, the first thing is that basically all the old guys had to sit out of the spring because they were all hurt. So, I mean, you saw a little bit of McCollum out there as he got a little healthier. But beyond that, I mean, Blackwell, Jones, Paysour, they all missed the spring. And, talking to Mac Brown about that, he was kind of, he was not, I'll just say he was not all broken up about it. Because it gave them the opportunity for Billups, Culliver, Shipp, and Taylor in particular. And not just that, I mean, Christian Hamilton, the another guy out there that you didn't mention. Those 5 guys got starter level reps all spring. And you and I watched the difference. The first open practice we saw, those guys weren't getting open. Because that secondary is pretty good. Those corners are legit. And that first open practice, we both looked at each other and were like, man, those receivers, they look good. There's a lot of talent there, but they're still learning, and you can see they're getting they're getting their butts handed to them a little bit by the more experienced secondary. You watched the same spring game I did.
There's some cooking going on.
Uh-huh. Now, it wasn't always of those vets. Let's be fair. I didn't see anybody running by and, giving Huzzy a whole bunch of problems. Right? But those guys started to win their share of reps there. And that's the difference of having a full spring of starter level reps. And, you say Jordan Shipp. I say, Paul Billups is another one to keep an eye on. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with that group of 5, because I think they really have a lot of talent. And across the board, I think if you went player for player, they're more talented than the older guys. They physically speaking, they're coming in with more talent than the guys that are currently out there that are upperclassmen came in with. Wide receiver is one of those positions where being a vet matters a lot. And you think about a Kobe Paysour, what I was just saying, like, look, he may only run 4.55, and he may be a little faster than that. I don't know. But my guess is he's somewhere in the, sort of mid to low 4.5 range. And some of the young guys might be a little faster than that. But Paysour is crafty. Craftiness goes a long way at the wide receiver position. So being a vet helps. But as those young guys got more experience and got more crafty over the course of the spring, I think those guys are going to contend for some jobs. It's going to be really, really interesting. And I'll go on record that I think at least one of those 5, if not 2 of those 5, wind up higher in terms of overall targets, overall catches, and overall yards than at least one of the 4, if not 2 of the 4 that we just broke down.
I agree with you, and I'll go further and say Jordan Shipp's 100% one of them. If he stays fully healthy, I think he's top 4 receiver on the team, maybe top 3.
And I think Billups, you could make the same case for. He looked really good in the spring game. And
those are guys that have different styles too, different skill sets as well.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you look at Billups. Billups is more of a long outside wide receiver who is going to be tough for teams to jam. He's got some long speed, a little bit more of a strider, but definitely kind of a downfield threat. Shipp, sort of your traditional inside-out player, but again, can sort of fill that outside role really well. The thing that they definitely have coming into this year, despite them being a little young with some of the depth, I really like the depth of this overall wide receiver group and think that, the cupboard is fuller there than it has been in a while. The thing they don't have is they don't have a Josh Downs. I don't think they have an Antoine Green in terms of a veteran Antoine Green type player at this stage. Interesting thing for me is whether or not they wind up having one of these young guys step in and become, one of that level player.
Interesting to see it happen. Final thoughts. We sort of talk all about it. We come down to these final thoughts that I try to nail it down in a couple minutes. But this is certainly a deep and talented room. Lonnie Galloway knows how to recruit. He knows how to get guys on campus and know how to develop them. You've got old, you've got young. I think for me, the concern for me in the entire room is you got to keep Paysour and McCollum healthy. If not both, definitely at least one of them's got to be healthy.
One of those guys needs to be healthy
every game, because to your point, having that slot sort of changes the game for everybody. We saw what Josh Downs was able to do at his time at Carolina. But Paysour or McCollum, I think they're the keys to the room. Jason, your final thoughts?
I think that's basically right. But to me, I mean, the again, I'm curious to see, are they going to have somebody, especially one of those young guys, step in and be kind of a De'Ami Brown? I mean, De'Ami Brown stepped in early and became one of those downfield threats that made things easy for his quarterback. There's a possibility that one of those young guys does that. And if it's not one of the young guys, does the quality that's there in terms of that youth force a guy, one of those older guys, to up his game that much to keep that job and become that? So it's going to be really interesting. There's some talent pushing some vets and some guys that have been banged up here and there and have had their struggles a little bit. We'll see what happens there, but I think we're going to see at least one or two of those young guys kind of break into the rotation and become real players this year.
That is Jason Staples. Before I get out of here, I got to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, sponsor of the show, friends of Inside Carolina. I say it all the time, folks. I want everybody that watches these shows to buy something from Johnny T-Shirt. I want everybody that watches to go to Congruity if you have a small business or mid-sized business and support our sponsors. They're the reason we're here. They're the reasons we give you this content, and you're able to watch this. Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, all your swag needs, and CongruityHR.com/Tar Heels for all your small business needs. Everything you possibly need. Those two sponsors, two local sponsors, supporting Inside Carolina, supporting you, the Inside Carolina subscriber. Jason, we got one more to do. I don't know what position we'll talk about next, but I think folks probably will care about it a lot. I guess we'll come back soon next week. Appreciate it.